The rain was coming down harder than it had all month, turning the quiet streets into a blurry mess of gray water and red tail lights. Inside the small, worn-down garage at the edge of town, Elias was already thinking about his armchair and the warm dinner waiting for him at home. He was 65 years old, with hands that looked like old root bark and a back that reminded him of his age every time he stood up too quickly. This garage, a place that smelled permanently of oil and old rubber, had been his whole life for 30 years. He wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better days and walked toward the front door, flipping the sign to closed with a satisfying clink. Just as his hand touched the metal lock to shut out the night, a pair of headlights cut through the heavy downpour. They weren't the bright, harsh LEDs of modern cars, but a softer, warm yellow glow. Elias squinted through the rain-streaked glass. A car was struggling to pull over, its engine making a sound like a giant coughing in the distance. It was a beautiful machine, a vintage Porsche 911, the kind of car they stopped making decades ago. It looked painfully out of place on the muddy shoulder of the road, looking more like it belonged in a museum than caught in a storm in the middle of nowhere. The car sputtered and died right in front of the gate, steam hissing from the back hood like an angry cat. Elias watched, sighed, and let his hand drop from the lock. He knew he should just go home. It was late, he was tired, and fixing a foreign engine on a rainy night was not how he wanted to end his day. But then he saw the driver's door open. A man jumped out, instantly soaked by the freezing rain. He wasn't wearing a fancy suit or holding an umbrella. He was dressed in a simple, dark hoodie and jeans that were already plastered to his legs. He ran to the front of the car, lifted the hood, and jumped back as a cloud of steam hit him in the face. He looked small against the side of the road, helpless and shivering. Elias watched the man look around desperately, realizing there was nowhere to go. The mechanic's heart softened. He couldn't leave a guy stranded in this weather, not even a guy driving a car worth more than Elias's house. Elias hit the button to raise the heavy garage door. The motor hummed and groaned, clanking loudly as the metal door rolled up. The sound cut through the noise of the rain. The stranger looked up, shielding his eyes with his hand. Elias waved him over, shouting over the sound of the storm. "Push it in. Don't try to start it, just push," Elias yelled. The stranger didn't argue. He didn't act entitled or yell for help. He just nodded, put his shoulder to the wet door frame, and pushed with everything he had. Elias ran out into the rain, his boots splashing in puddles, and put his weight against the rear bumper. Together, they grunted and shoved the sleek car into the warm, yellow light of the workshop. As soon as the wheels cleared the threshold, Elias slammed the button again, and the door rattled down, shutting out the cold wind and the noise of the storm. The silence inside the garage was sudden and heavy. The only sound was the dripping water from the car's chassis hitting the concrete floor and the heavy breathing of the two men. The stranger pulled his soaked hood down, revealing messy dark hair plastered to his forehead. He looked at Elias, water dripping from his nose, and offered a tired, apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry," the stranger said. His voice was quiet, raspy from the cold air. "I didn't mean to bother you. You were closing." Elias waved a hand dismissively, walking over to a bench to grab a towel. "It's just a car. Machines break, people get wet. It happens. Here." He tossed the towel to the stranger. "Dry off before you catch pneumonia. I've got some coffee in the back if you want it. It's probably strong enough to strip paint, but it's hot." The stranger caught the towel, looking genuinely surprised by the kindness. He wiped his face and shook his head like a wet dog. "Coffee sounds amazing. Thank you. I really appreciate this. Everyone else just drove past. Elias walked over to the car, ignoring the water soaking into his own shirt. He ran a hand gently over the fender. Beautiful machine, he muttered. 1973, maybe 74. The stranger's eyes lit up a little as he rubbed the towel over his arms. Close. 73. She's usually tough, but tonight she just gave up. Elias popped the hood latch. It was stiff from the cold, but it popped open. He peered into the engine bay. It was tight, crowded, and hot. The smell of antifreeze and burnt rubber filled the air. Yeah, she didn't give up, Elias said, pointing a wrench at a burst hose. You just pushed her too hard in the rain. Radiator hose blew. Coolant went everywhere. Easy fix, but you're lucky you didn't cook the engine. The stranger walked over, looking at the mess of green fluid and steam. Can you fix it? I can fix anything, Elias said with a grunt, though there was a hint of pride in his voice. But not tonight. It's too late to get parts, and I need to let this engine cool down before I touch it or I'll burn my hands off. You're stuck here for a bit. The stranger leaned back against the workbench, looking exhausted. That's fair. I don't have anywhere else to be. Elias looked at the man. He didn't ask for a name, didn't ask for ID, didn't ask for insurance info. He just saw a tired human being in a warm, dry garage. The mechanic went to the small office in the corner, poured 2 cups of black coffee from a dusty pot, and handed one to the stranger. I'm Elias, he said. The stranger took the cup with both hands, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. He looked Elias in the eye, and for a second, the famous face that millions recognized on screen was just a face in the crowd, grateful for a hot drink. I'm Keanu, the stranger said softly. Elias took a sip of his own coffee and didn't even blink. The name didn't register with the old mechanic. He lived a simple life, far away from Hollywood gossip and movie theaters. To him, Keanu was just the guy with the broken Porsche and the wet hoodie. Nice to meet you, Keanu, Elias said, setting his cup down and grabbing a flashlight. Drink your coffee. I'm going to take a better look at this engine and see what we're dealing with. You can hang out. Just don't touch the red wrenches, I have a system for those. Keanu chuckled, a dry, tired sound. I wouldn't dream of it. The two of them stood there in the quiet light of the garage, the storm raging outside, invisible behind the metal walls. Elias started whistling a low tune as he inspected the damage, completely unaware that the man sipping coffee behind him was one of the biggest movie stars in the world. For tonight, they were just 2 strangers brought together by a broken car and a little bit of luck. The rain continued to hammer against the metal roof of the garage, a relentless drumming that actually made the quiet inside feel even cozier. Elias clicked on his heavy-duty work light, aiming the bright beam directly into the engine bay of the Porsche. The air smelled of wet asphalt and the sharp, chemical tang of spilled coolant. Elias grunted, wiping his hands on a fresh rag, and leaned in deep. He wasn't just looking at the engine, he was listening to it, even though it was off. Mechanics have a way of talking to machines with their fingers, and this old engine had a story to tell. All right, let's see what the trouble is, Elias muttered, mostly to himself. Keanu stood a few feet away, clutching his coffee cup like it was a lifeline. He watched Elias work with an intensity that surprised the old mechanic. Most people with expensive cars just stared at their phones or paced around, anxious about the time or the cost. But this guy was different. He was watching the movements of Elias's hands, following the path of the wrench, his brow furrowed in genuine interest. "You see this?" Elias asked, pointing a grease-covered finger at a rubber hose that was split open. "This is your culprit. Radiator hose just gave up the ghost. When that goes, the water pumps out, the engine gets hot, and everything stops." Keanu stepped closer, squinting at the small tear. "Is that hard to fix?" "For me, no. For you, maybe," Elias chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "But I don't have the part for a vintage model like this sitting on my shelf. I'm going to have to get creative." Elias walked over to a wall of bins that looked like a chaotic mess of metal and rubber to anyone but him. He started digging through containers, muttering numbers and sizes under his breath. While he was busy hunting for a piece that might fit, he heard a noise behind him. It was the rhythmic swish-swoosh of a broom. Elias turned around, wiping his hands on his coveralls. There was Keanu, pushing the old bristle broom across the concrete floor, gathering up the dirt, dust, and metal shavings that Elias hadn't swept in weeks. He wasn't doing it because he was asked to, and he wasn't doing it to be polite in a fake way. He was doing it like he actually wanted to help, like he couldn't just stand there and drink coffee while someone else worked. "You don't have to do that, son," Elias said, leaning against the workbench. "You're the customer." Keanu stopped leaning on the broom and shrugged. "I don't like standing around. Makes me feel useless. Besides, you're helping me. Least I can do is tidy up a bit." Elias watched him for a moment. He saw the way the man moved, careful, purposeful. He swept around the toolboxes without bumping them, careful not to disturb the order of things. "You know," Elias said slowly, "you handle that broom better than my last helper." Keanu smiled, just a small turn of the lips. "I've done a bit of cleaning in my time. We all have to start somewhere." They fell back into a comfortable rhythm after that. Elias went back to the car, lying down on a mechanic's creeper, the rolling board mechanics used to slide under cars. He rolled himself under the Porsche, the cold metal of the car frame inches from his nose. The space was tight, greasy, and uncomfortable. He needed to get the old belt off from the bottom, but his fingers were stiff, and the angle was awkward. "Hey, can you give me a hand for a second?" Elias's voice echoed slightly from under the car. Keanu was there in an instant, dropping the broom. "What do you need?" "I need you to hold this flashlight right above the crank pulley. Don't move it. Just keep it steady on the bolt." Keanu crouched down, taking the heavy flashlight. He held it perfectly still, his arm steady as a rock. For the next 20 minutes, they worked in tandem. Elias would grunt an instruction left a bit tighter, hold it there, and Keanu would adjust without a word of complaint. It was a strange partnership, a 65-year-old mechanic who had spent his life in this small town, and a world-famous actor covered in grime, holding a light in a dingy garage. Eventually, Elias slid out from under the car, his face smeared with a streak of black grease. He sat up, groaning as his back popped. "There. That's the hard part done. The belt is off." He looked at the parts he had managed to scavenge and modify. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was strong. It would hold. He began the process of fitting the new hose and the belt, tightening bolts with a torque wrench. The clicking sound of the wrench filled the shop, a satisfying, precise noise. Around 11 o'clock, the coffee pot ran dry. Keanu noticed it first. He walked over to the small pot, checked it, and without asking, he rinsed it out in the utility sink. He found a can of cheap grounds in the cabinet and started a fresh brew. The smell of fresh coffee soon mingled with the smell of oil, making the garage feel strangely homey. Elias watched him from the hood of the car. He was starting to realize that this Keanu guy wasn't the average wealthy stranger he sometimes dealt with, people who treated him like a servant just because he wore blue coveralls. There was a humility here that was rare. It made Elias want to do a better job. It made him want to make sure this car ran perfectly, not just because he was paid to, but because the car belonged to a decent human being. You know, Elias said, wiping down the engine block with a rag to clean up the spilled coolant. Most guys with a car like this wouldn't be caught dead holding a flashlight or sweeping floors. They'd be in the office on the phone with a lawyer. Keanu leaned against the fender, crossing his arms. He looked tired, but his eyes were alert. It's just a car. It's made of metal and parts. It can be fixed. People are more important. You're doing me a huge favor, Elias. I'm not going to just watch you struggle. Elias tightened the final clamp on the radiator hose and gave it a firm tug to make sure it was secure. He looked at the engine. It looked good. It looked clean. He had even wiped down the valve covers while he was working there, just to make it look nice. Well, Elias said, stepping back and grabbing a rag to wipe his hands. She's all put back together. I won't know for sure if the seal holds until we get some pressure in there, but theoretically, you should be good to go. He walked over to the driver's side door and opened it. The leather interior was pristine. Turn the key, but don't pump the gas. Let the fuel pump do the work. Keanu slid into the driver's seat. He looked small in the bucket seat, but he fit. He put his hand on the key, took a deep breath, and turned it. For a second, there was just the whir of the starter motor. Then, the engine roared to life. It wasn't a smooth, modern whisper, it was the loud, mechanical growl of a vintage racing machine. The sound vibrated through the garage floor, rattling the tools on the wall. It settled into a deep, lumpy idle that sounded like music to Elias's ears. Keanu revved the engine slightly, a grin spreading across his face. He looked out the window at Elias, giving him a thumbs up. Elias nodded, feeling a swell of pride in his chest. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was past midnight. The rain outside was still coming down, but it didn't matter anymore. The car was alive. The stranger was happy. And for the first time in a long time, Elias didn't feel like just a tired old mechanic. He felt like he had made a friend. All right, Elias shouted over the engine noise. Kill it for a second. Let's check for leaks. Keanu turned the key, and the silence rushed back in, though the air was now filled with the warmth of the engine. They both leaned over the hood, watching the radiator hose carefully. Not a drop. It was bone dry. Perfect, Keanu said softly. That's really perfect. I don't know how to thank you. Elias walked over to the sink to wash the worst of the grease off his hands. We'll get to that in a minute. First, let's have another cup of that coffee you made. It tastes better than mine. The two of them sat on old wooden crates in the corner of the office, the cheap plastic cups of coffee warming their hands. For a few minutes, nobody said anything. The silence wasn't awkward, it was the kind of quiet that comes when two people have worked hard and are just glad to be sitting down. Outside, the rain was finally starting to slow down, turning from a heavy storm into a soft drizzle that tapped gently against the garage windows. Elias watched the steam rise from his cup. He looked over at the stranger. The guy looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped forward like he was carrying the weight of the world on them. It reminded Elias of how he used to look after pulling a double shift at the factory 30 years ago. He didn't see a movie star. He just saw a tired man who needed a break. "You know," Elias said, breaking the silence, "you did a good job with that floor. I haven't seen it that clean since I opened this place." The stranger laughed softly, taking a sip of the hot drink. "I didn't want to get in the way. My dad always taught me that if someone is helping you, you find a way to help them back. It's just respect." "Respect is hard to find these days," Elias nodded. He took a long drink of his coffee and grimaced slightly. He never could get the ratio of grounds to water right on that old machine. Most people just want to get in, get out, and get on with their lives. They don't see the work. They just see the bill. The stranger set his cup down on the floor and stood up. He stretched his arms over his head, his spine cracking loudly. He walked over to the workbench where his wallet sat and picked it up. It was a nice leather wallet, worn at the edges, showing that it had been used for a long time. He opened it and pulled out a sleek, black credit card. "All right," the stranger said, his voice shifting back to business. He walked over to Elias with a serious look on his face. "How much do I owe you for the hose, the belt, the labor, and keeping me out of the rain? Seriously, I want to take care of this properly." Elias looked at the card, then up at the man. He thought about the parts. The radiator hose was an aftermarket one he'd had in a bin for years, maybe worth $15. The belt was another $20. He had spent about an hour and a half working on the car. Labor in a big city shop would be $150 an hour easy. Elias knew that. He also knew that the Porsche parked in his bay was worth more than his entire life savings. This guy could afford to pay $1,000 without blinking. But then Elias looked down at the stranger's feet. He was wearing heavy, scuffed work boots. The laces were frayed, and there was dried mud caked in the tread. They weren't designer fashion boots. They looked like boots that had actually walked through dirt and gravel. Elias looked back at the car, then at the spotless floor, and finally at the tired eyes of the man standing in front of him. "Forget it," Elias said, waving his hand dismissively. The stranger froze. He blinked, his hand holding the card hovering in mid-air. "Excuse me." "I said forget it," Elias repeated, standing up and tossing his empty cup into the trash can. "You don't owe me anything." "You can't be serious," the stranger said, a look of confusion washing over his face. "You stayed late. You used your parts. You fixed my car. I can't just walk out of here without paying you. That wouldn't be right." Elias walked over to the counter and started organizing some screws, not looking at him. "Look, the hose was just taking up space on a shelf. It was collecting dust. The belt was the same way. And the labor, I wasn't doing anything else tonight. I was just sitting here listening to the rain. It wasn't any trouble." "It was trouble," the stranger insisted, stepping closer. His voice was low and intense. "It was a lot of trouble. And you were kind about it? Please, take the card. I don't care if it's $1,000. Just tell me the number." Elias stopped fiddling with the screws and turned around to face him. He crossed his arms over his chest, his expression stern. This was the stubborn side of him, the side that refused to let anyone pity him or pay him out of guilt. "I don't want your money," Elias said firmly. "You swept my floor. You held the flashlight while I was under that car, even though you were freezing and soaking wet. You didn't complain once. You didn't act like you were better than me because you drive a fancy car. To me, that means a whole lot more than a piece of plastic or a stack of bills." The stranger opened his mouth to argue, but Elias cut him off. "We're even," Elias said. "You helped me, I helped you. That's how neighbors are supposed to act. If I take your money, it turns into a business transaction. And I don't want it to be that. I just wanted to help a guy get home safe." The stranger stood there, completely stunned. He looked at Elias, then at the card in his hand, and then slowly put the wallet back into his pocket. It was rare for him to meet someone who didn't want something in return, who didn't see him as a paycheck. He looked down at the floor for a moment, trying to find the right words, but they seemed to be stuck in his throat. I don't know what to say," the stranger finally whispered. "Thank you, Elias." "Really? Don't mention it," Elias grunted, grabbing his keys off the hook. "Just get going before the rain picks up again. It's late." The stranger walked over to the driver's side of the Porsche but paused before getting in. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper and a pen. He scribbled something down quickly and walked back to Elias. He pressed the paper into the old mechanic's hand. "If you ever change your mind, or if you ever need anything, call me," the stranger said. His grip on Elias's hand was firm and sincere. Elias looked down at the paper. It just had a first name and a phone number scrawled on it in messy handwriting. "Keanu." "All right, Keanu," Elias said, folding the paper and shoving it into his pocket without looking at it twice. "I'll keep that in mind. Drive safe now. And keep an eye on that temperature gauge for the next few miles, just in case." "I will," Keanu promised. He got into the car, the leather squeaking as he settled in. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life one last time, echoing off the metal walls of the garage. He gave Elias a final wave, a wave that felt like a goodbye between friends, and then slowly steered the car toward the open door. Elias watched the tail lights disappear into the misty night air. He pressed the button, and the garage door rumbled shut, sealing the world out again. The shop was quiet once more. He looked down at the floor. It was cleaner than it had been in years. He looked at the empty spot where the Porsche had been. It felt empty, but not in a bad way. He walked back to the office, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. He grabbed his jacket and switched off the main lights, leaving only the security glow of the street lamps outside filtering through the windows. As he locked the front door and stepped out into the cool night air, he patted his pocket where the scrap of paper was. He had a feeling he wouldn't be calling that number. He wasn't the type to ask for favors, but he was glad he had it. It wasn't every night you met a decent person in a world that often felt cold and uncaring. Elias walked to his old truck parked in the back, humming a tune. He hadn't made a dime, but for some reason, he felt richer than he had in years. The next 3 days passed by in a blur of routine for Elias. The storm had cleared up, leaving the town bright and sunny, but life inside the garage was the same as always: grease, noise, and the constant struggle to keep old machines running. He had spent the morning underneath a massive Ford pickup truck, wrestling with the rusted exhaust pipe that refused to budge. His arms were covered in grime, and his back ached, but it was honest work. He hadn't thought much about the stranger with the Porsche, except to occasionally glance at the spotless floor where the car had sat, a small reminder of the strange night. Around mid-afternoon, the familiar sound of the street was suddenly drowned out by a deep, heavy rumble. It wasn't the loud buzz of a motorcycle or the whine of a sports car, but the powerful, synchronized purr of multiple large engines. Elias slid out from under the fort on his creeper, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. He squinted toward the open garage door, his eyes adjusting to the bright sunlight outside. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. The usually quiet street in front of his shop was packed. There were 3 massive, black SUVs with tinted windows that looked like they belonged in a presidential motorcade. Parked right behind them was another vintage car, a gleaming dark blue Mustang that looked like it had just rolled off a movie set. They were idling loudly, filling the air with the smell of expensive fuel and heat. Elias stood up, grabbing a rag to clean his hands. He wasn't sure what was happening. Maybe they were lost, maybe a film crew was shooting nearby. He watched the doors of the SUVs open. Several people stepped out, some with cameras, some holding clipboards, and a few big guys who looked like security. They stood around looking at the small, dingy garage, their expensive shoes stepping over the cracks in the pavement. Then, the back door of the middle SUV opened, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, but this time he looked different. His hair was neatly styled, and he stood with a calm confidence that demanded attention. Even in the bright sunlight, Elias recognized the face immediately. It was the guy from the other night. Keanu. But now that the adrenaline of the rainstorm was gone, and the man wasn't wearing a soaked hoodie, Elias realized the truth. It hit him like a sledgehammer. The guy wasn't just Keanu. He was that Keanu. The guy from the movies. The one people talked about on the news. Elias's jaw dropped slightly. He looked down at his dirty coveralls and then back at the celebrity standing in his parking lot. Keanu didn't wave to the cameras or look at his entourage. He just locked eyes with Elias and smiled. It was the same soft, tired smile he had worn in the rain. He walked toward the garage, leaving the group of people behind. Elias walked out onto the pavement, feeling a little self-conscious. Can I help you folks?" he asked, his voice sounding rough in the quiet afternoon. "Hey, Elias," Keanu said, walking right up to him. He didn't act like a superstar, he acted like an old friend stopping by to say hello. "How's the truck holding up?" It's fine," Elias stammered, still trying to process the scene. "I didn't know you were, you know." Famous Keanu finished the sentence for him, chuckling softly. "Yeah, sorry about not mentioning it the other night. It's sometimes easier to just be a guy with a broken car." By now, the rest of the group had moved closer. A young woman with a headset was whispering into a radio, and the security guards were scanning the street. A man with a large camera on his shoulder hoisted it up, the red recording light blinking on. Elias felt his heart rate pick up. He was just a mechanic. He fixed cars. He didn't do interviews or whatever this was. "What's all this about?" Elias asked, gesturing to the small crowd that had invaded his space. Keanu took a deep breath. He looked at Elias with a serious expression. "The other night, you did something for me that nobody has done in a long time. You helped me without wanting anything back. You didn't care who I was. You just saw someone who needed a hand." Keanu paused, glancing back at his team. "I went back to my hotel and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I told some people about what happened here, about you fixing my car and sweeping my floors. They wanted to come see the place." "See the place?" Elias looked around. "It's just a garage. It's a mess." "It's a great place," Keanu disagreed firmly. "But I didn't just come back to show it off. I came back because I can't let what you did go unnoticed. You refused to take my money, Elias. You said we were even. But I don't think we are." Elias crossed his arms, feeling defensive. I told you, I don't need a reward. I didn't fix your car for a payout. I know, Keanu said gently. And that's exactly why I'm back. If you had charged me $1,000, I would have paid it and forgotten about it by morning. But you didn't. So, I want to do something for you. And I brought some friends to help make it happen. He nodded to the man with the camera, who stepped forward to get a better angle of the two men standing together. Elias instinctively took a step back. He was uncomfortable being the center of attention. He preferred the shadows under the cars. You don't have to do this, Elias said quietly. I want to, Keanu said, stepping closer. He looked Elias in the eye, and for a moment, the cameras and the noise of the street faded away. You're a good man, Elias. The world needs more mechanics like you, and more people like you. Just hear me out, okay, let me try to even the score. Elias looked at Keanu. He saw the sincerity in the actor's face. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This wasn't fake. Keanu Reeves looked genuinely moved by a simple radiator repair and a swept floor. Elias sighed, his shoulders relaxing. He couldn't fight the whole world, and he couldn't say no to the man who had stood in the rain with him. All right, Elias said slowly. But I'm not putting on a suit for the camera. This is what I am. Keanu grinned. I wouldn't have it any other way. The camera operator moved in closer, capturing the interaction between the greasy mechanic and the Hollywood icon. It was a strange contrast, the bright Hollywood lights meeting the gritty reality of a blue-collar life. But as they stood there talking, it didn't feel strange. It felt like two guys who understood the value of hard work and respect, finally settling a debt that only one of them knew existed. The air was buzzing with anticipation, and Elias had a feeling that his life was about to change, whether he wanted it to or not. The camera continued to roll, the small red light blinking in the dim light of the garage, but for a moment, nobody moved. The air felt heavy, not with tension, but with the weight of something important about to happen. Keanu reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He moved slowly, pulling out a simple white envelope. It wasn't fancy, no logos or stamps, just a plain envelope that looked like it might hold a birthday card. He held it out to Elias. I want you to take this. Elias looked at the envelope, then at Keanu. He instinctively put his grease-stained hands behind his back. I told you, I don't want your money. We settled this. I fixed your car, you swept the floor. We're good. Keanu didn't pull the envelope back. He took a step closer, his expression serious but kind. Please, Elias. Just look at it. It's not for me. It's for this place. Something in Keanu's voice made Elias drop his guard. He slowly brought his hands forward and took the envelope. It felt thick. He undid the metal clasp and pulled out the paper inside. It was a check. Elias squinted at the numbers, thinking maybe he was misreading it in the shadows. He looked at the first number. Then he looked at the zeros. It wasn't a payment for a radiator hose. It wasn't even a payment for a month's work. It was an amount of money that Elias hadn't seen in 10 years. It was enough to pay off the back taxes on the garage that kept him awake at night. It was enough to fix the leaking roof that dripped water onto his toolbox whenever it rained hard. It was enough to buy new tires for his truck and keep the lights on for a long time. Elias's hand began to shake. The paper made a crinkling sound in the silence. He looked up, his eyes wide. I can't take this. This is too much. This is crazy. You don't even know me. "I know you," Keanu said quietly. "I know that you stayed late in the rain to help a stranger. I know that you treated me with respect when you didn't have to. I know that this place is special. I walked around and looked at the neighborhood while we were waiting. This is the only honest shop for miles. If you close down, people lose a friend, not just a mechanic." Elias opened his mouth to argue, but the words caught in his throat. He looked back at the check, his thumb brushing over the ink. It was real. It was a lifeline thrown to a man who was drowning in silence, and the lifeline came from the person everyone thought needed saving. Before Elias could find his voice, Keanu turned his head and nodded to the large men standing by the SUVs. "Okay, guys. Bring it in." The security guards opened the back doors of the trucks again. This time, they weren't carrying equipment or cameras. Two of them walked in carrying large, heavy boxes. They set them down on the clean floor with a loud metallic thud. Elias stared at the boxes. They were red, bright fire engine red. The logo on the side was the best brand in the business, professional tools that Elias had only ever flipped through in catalogs at the parts store, dreaming about what it would be like to own a set that didn't rust. He looked at his own tool bench, a mismatched collection of battered wrenches he'd bought at yard sales or inherited from his father. The sockets were rounded off, the ratchets were sticky, and the pliers were bent. "I saw your tools when I was sweeping," Keanu said, walking over to the new boxes and lifting the lid. Inside, the chrome steel gleamed under the work lights. It was a complete set. Sockets, wrenches, ratchets, screwdrivers, everything a mechanic could ever need, arranged perfectly in foam cutouts. "You can't fix the world with broken tools, Elias. You deserve the best. You do good work. You should have good equipment to do it with." Elias stood there, frozen. His eyes traveled from the shiny new tools to the check in his hand, and finally to Keanu's face. The mechanic, the guy who had seen it all, who prided himself on being tough and independent, felt his knees get weak. He felt a burning behind his eyes, a stinging sensation that he hadn't felt in years. He reached out and touched the handle of a new ratchet. It was cold, smooth, and perfect. Why was all Elias could choke out. "Why do this for me?" Keanu looked at the old mechanic. The actor who had millions of fans, who had walked red carpets and performed in front of cameras his whole life, suddenly looked very small and humble. He realized that no movie scene he had ever filmed was as powerful as this simple moment. "Because you were kind," Keanu said softly. "And kindness is rare. People are always rushing, always taking. You gave. You gave me your time, your coffee, and your help. You didn't ask for a thing. That changed my night. Maybe it changed my week. I just wanted to change yours back." Keanu looked around the greasy, humble garage. He looked at Elias, the man with the grease-stained hands and the heart of gold. For a long moment, Keanu couldn't speak. He was left completely speechless. He had prepared a speech in his head, something witty or cool to say for the video, but looking at Elias, all the words vanished. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, nodding slowly, deeply moved by the reality of the man standing in front of him. Finally, Keanu stepped forward and put a hand on Elias's shoulder. It was a firm grip. "You're a good man, Elias. Don't ever change that." Elias wiped a sleeve across his eyes, leaving a streak of grease on his forehead. He laughed, a wet, happy sound. "I'll try not to." Keanu smiled, that genuine, boyish smile that everyone knew, but this time it was just for Elias. Take care of yourself. And take care of this place. You too, Keanu, Elias managed to say. Drive safe. Keanu gave a small wave to the camera crew, signaling they were done. He walked toward his SUV, but he stopped at the door and looked back one last time. He saw the old mechanic standing next to the shiny red toolboxes, holding the check like it was a precious artifact. It was a picture Keanu knew he would keep in his mind forever. The SUVs roared to life and pulled out of the lot, leaving the street quiet again. The camera crew packed up their gear efficiently, shaking Elias's hand and wishing him well before climbing into their vans and driving away. Slowly, the noise faded away. The garage was left in silence, just the way it was before. But everything was different now. Elias walked over to his workbench. He carefully placed the check in the top drawer of his old desk, under a pile of invoices where it would be safe. Then, he went back to the new toolboxes. He ran his hand over the red metal. He picked up a wrench, feeling the weight of it. It felt like the future. He looked around the empty shop. The shadows were long, but they didn't feel lonely anymore. He picked up a rag and wiped down a spot on the new toolbox, even though it was already clean. He took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of oil and new steel. For the first time in a long time, Elias wasn't worried about the rent. He wasn't worried about his tools breaking. He just felt lucky. Well, old girl, he whispered to the quiet garage, patting the red metal box. Looks like we might just make it after all. He grabbed his coffee cup from the shelf, poured the last of the cold pot, and took a sip. It tasted terrible, but to Elias, it was the best thing he had ever tasted. He started to whistle a low tune as he turned back to the Ford truck, ready to finish the day, his heart lighter than it had been in 30 years.